The night air trembles with unspoken prayers. Steel whispers against silk as a warrior adjusts her armor. One mistake could end a dynasty. One victory could rewrite history. Their names were once spoken in fear and reverence. Tomoe Gozen, Nakano Takeko, Hōjō Masako. History tried to bury them, yet their legends refused to die. They were Japan's hidden warriors, women who defied expectation, led rebellions, and fought for honor in a world that denied their existence. Listen closely. Beyond the clatter of hooves and the hiss of arrows, there is another sound. The quiet resolve of women who sharpened blades in shadowed rooms, who stood at gates when men had ridden out, who swore oaths to family and clan and kept them, even when the chronicles looked the other way. Tonight, we pull open the screen between myth and memory and step into their world. Welcome to Japan Rewind, where we uncover the hidden truths behind samurai, castles, and legends of Japan. Stay with me, because what happened next would change everything you thought you knew about what it meant to be samurai. Who were these shadows? Who were these women who dared to wield the sword in a land that idolized masculine strength? Why did official histories leave so many of their names at the margins? And what truths lie beneath the centuries of silence? Today, we enter the concealed world of Japan's onna-musha, female warriors born of the samurai class. Women whose courage shaped local fates and sometimes national outcomes. You'll see how noble daughters became legends, how strategic brilliance could cut deeper than any blade, and why their last stand still echoes through modern Japan. This is their story, the untold warrior tales that history almost forgot. Not a fantasy of invincible heroines, but a careful reweaving of evidence, epic, and lived reality, where legend glows at the edges of the factual, and the factual keeps legend honest. The world they fought in. Picture Japan in the late 12th century, a land bound by hierarchy, oath, and a warrior ethos that later ages would call bushidō, a word that would crystallize long after these women first took up arms, but an ethic already taking shape. In the great houses of the Heian court and the rising Kamakura warrior government, daughters of the bushi class were raised to serve and protect their clans. They studied poetry and calligraphy, managed estates with precision, and, in many households, trained with the naginata, a curved blade on a long shaft closely associated with samurai women. Why the naginata? Reach and leverage. Against a mounted foe, a smaller combatant could hold space. At a doorway, its arc controlled distance and timing. In practiced hands, the weapon fused elegance with lethality, a dance that set the tempo of a room, a corridor, a courtyard. Society expected these women to remain unseen, protectors of the home, not heroes of the field. But war seldom respects expectation. When the front line collapses, the last line becomes the first, and the keep, the home, turns into a fortress where courage is no longer optional. The rising blade of the woman warrior. Modern writers often say onna-musha, female martial artist. Period sources frequently use onna-musha, woman warrior. The categories blur, the practice remains. Chronicles, clan documents, and later epics describe women defending castles, rallying retainers, or leading sorties when necessity demanded it. Archaeology adds weight. At some sites, excavations have identified female remains interred with weapons or armor plates in warrior contexts. Exact proportions vary and remain debated, but the pattern is clear. Women appear in the martial record more than tidy later narratives admitted. Consider Hangaku Gozen, who in 1201 defended Totsusaka Castle during the Kennen Rebellion, loosing arrows from the battlements before being captured after fierce resistance. Or Tachibana Ginchio in Kyushu, who, as a teenager in the late Sengoku age, succeeded to leadership and is remembered for drilling women in arms to secure the home front. Add to them the local heroines whose names linger in temple stones and village festivals. Women history footnotes. Families remember. They were exceptions, yes, but not anomalies. They form a line across centuries. Household defenders, sudden commanders, last guardians of a gate no one else could hold. Tomoe Gozen, the warrior of legend. The year is 1184. Snow breathes over the fields of Awazu. The Genpei War tears Japan apart. Minamoto and Taira banners ripple in a wind that smells of smoke and pine. Through the chaos rides Tomoe Gozen. The epic tradition of the Tale of the Heike calls her especially beautiful, a warrior worth 1,000, describing a consummate archer and horsewoman who fought for Minamoto no Yoshinaka. In these accounts, she does not serve behind him, but beside him, riding with the advance, striking with the elite. At Awazu, the epic relates a single combat. Tomoe seizes an enemy champion, Onda no Hachiru Moroshige drags him from the saddle and takes his head. Whether every detail is literal or a heightened poetic memory, the impression is consistent. Tomoe stands where men said a woman could not, and refuses to yield. What became of her? The sources fragment. One thread suggests a last ride into the press of battle. Another imagines a nun's cell and the slow quiet of prayer. And still another says that on a winter morning, when reed beds are rimed with frost, you can hear a lone horse and a bright blade cutting air like silver. Hōjō Masako, the nun shogun. Not every battle is fought with steel. Some are won by a mind that never sleeps. Hōjō Masako was born in 1157 into a rising Kamakura house. She married Minamoto no Yoritomo, the founder of the shogun government. When he died suddenly in 1199, the careful scaffolding of power shuddered. Rival clans tested the new order. Old Kyūto looked east, hoping to reclaim what the warriors had taken. Masako shaved her head and took Buddhist vows, not as retreat, but as disguise. In nun's robes, she governed with clear eyes and blade-sharp judgment. She maneuvered her sons into regency, balanced factions with gifts and threats, and removed those determined to sink the state. In 1221, during the Zyukyu disturbance, later accounts remember her addressing assembled warriors, reminding them of their debt to Yoritomo and the shogunate. Whether that single oration is preserved, verbatim is uncertain. What is certain is the outcome. Eastern armies marched, the imperial bid failed, and Hōjō rule hardened for generations. Masako proved what strategists know. Power is not only the hand that grips the sword, it's the hand that decides when the sword is drawn. The code of honor, beyond death. Why did these women choose a path paved with grief? Because the warrior ethos, the cluster of ideals later named bushidō, taught that some values outrank life: loyalty, duty, reputation, and the calm ownership of one's fate. For some onna-musha, death could be a final act of control. When capture or humiliation loomed, women turned to zigai, a ritualized self-killing with a kaiken, the small dagger samurai women of status often possessed. The ritual was precise, a throat cut performed after binding the knees with silk cords so the body would fall composed, dignity preserved even in death. During the long wars of unification, there were sieges in which women prepared for death rather than surrender. Odawara in 1590 is sometimes evoked in later retellings. The broader record of the siege is clear, while the most dramatic tableaux are harder to substantiate. The meaning, however, is legible across sources. Better an end freely chosen than a life stolen by an enemy. The art of defense. Collective courage. This story is not only about singular champions, it is about collectives, mothers, daughters, widows, retainers' wives, who turned households into fortresses and logistics into a battle art. When foreign fleets massed during the Muko invasions of Zyū-274 and Zyū-281, men hurried to the front lines, and women became the rear echelon spine. They milled rice, maintained armories, tended the wounded, ferried messages, and organized evacuations. In some communities, when lines failed and doorways became frontiers, women took up naginata and bows, not for glory, but because someone had to hold the threshold. Think of it as the defense of the household, not merely walls and rooms, but the culture those rooms contained. Folklore remembers grandmothers teaching cutting angles between lullabies, and girls learning how to set a stance before they learned to hem a sleeve. Japan survived the Muko. Later generations praised the kamikaze, the divine winds, and rightly. But the quieter miracle was the discipline of those who never left the courtyards and yet kept the country standing. But beyond these collective acts of courage, individual flames continued to burn across the centuries. Women whose names survived not in grand chronicles, but in local memories and family records. Other flames in the dark. Between Tomoe and Takeko, other names flicker. There is Miyurin-ni, remembered in Kyushu for rallying defenders after her husband's death and organizing resistance during the late Sengoku conflicts. There is Tachibana Ginchio, an heiress who led her clan in turbulent years and is credited in sources with recruiting a women's guard and training castle maidens in arms. There is Yamamoto Nizima Yae of Aidu, who, as rifles replaced swords, took up a firearm to defend her city in 1868, then carried that same stubborn courage into nursing, education, and public life. Some of these women are well documented. Others survive through local memories braided with chronicles. Together, they say the same thing. When order faltered, women stepped forward, not as mascots of men's courage, but as agents of their own. Nakano Takeko, the final flame. Now fast forward to the Boshin War, 1868. The Meiji Restoration is dismantling the samurai world. Old banners come down, topknots fall to the floor, gunfire drowns the old drum patterns. In the northern domain of Aidu, a 21-year-old woman refuses to let the last page of that world be written without her. Nakano Takeko, scholar of Chinese classics, instructor's daughter, trained with the naginata from girlhood, gathers a band of women, the Zyushitai, the women's army. Accounts vary on headcount, but agree on intent, to fight not as a token, but as a unit. The siege tightens. Imperial shells shatter roof tiles and shrine eaves. Smoke lies low in the streets. When the order comes, Takeko leads her women into the teeth of rifle fire. Contemporary testimony credits her with cutting down several soldiers before a bullet finds her chest. Bleeding out, she calls to her sister Yuko, "Take my head. Do not let them take it as a trophy." It is a terrible request and a loving one. Yuko obeys. The head is taken to Hokkaizi and buried beneath a pine. A simple stone marks a courage no monument can contain. Takeko's death is not the end of women in Japanese public life, but it is the last blaze of the old martial order, a bright, brief flare in the winds of modernity. The silent centuries. Then a different campaign begins. Memory management. The new government marches toward westernization. Conscription replaces hereditary service. Swords shift from necessity to symbol. The nation's story is rewritten for railways and parliaments. The feminine ideal is recast. The wise mother, the good wife, Ryusai Kenbo. Education, yes, but domestic. Virtue, yes, but unarmed. Woman warriors become awkward footnotes, inconvenient to a tidy tale of progress or to a later myth of timeless traditional roles. Armor goes behind glass. Names fade from textbooks. Silence settles where songs should be. Even scholars, working with the sources they had and the assumptions they inherited, often looked past the traces. It would take time, and trowels, to hear the buried voices again. Legacy and awakening. In the late 20th century, spades and microscopes begin tugging at the silence. Archaeologists document female skeletons in martial contexts. Historians reread chronicles with different questions. Curators re-examine women's armor once dismissed as ceremonial and find evidence of practical design. At the same time, douzyu fill with a new generation. Women practice the naginata not as museum ritual, but as living discipline. Relearning line and leverage, how the hips turn the blade, how the back foot stamps a promise into the floorboards. Popular culture follows. Novels, films, manga, games. Sometimes romanticized, sometimes clumsy, sometimes brilliant. Imperfect stories can still reopen doors. What matters is that the names come back into circulation. That a girl who loves history can hear Tomoe and Takeko and Masako and understand that Japan's warrior past was never entirely male. And outside training halls, the old spirit migrates into new arenas, into boardrooms and labs, design studios and parliaments, classrooms and clinics. Different weapons now, pens, code, budgets, ballots, but the same spine of resolve. Step forward when others step back. Carry the weight when the moment demands it. Keep faith with what you're sworn to protect. What the record can and cannot say. A word about evidence. This story lives in three kinds of sources: documents, bones, and memory. Documents include chronicles and clan records, some sober, some epic, each with its agenda. Bones come from graves and battlegrounds, mute but eloquent when studied carefully. Memory survives in local shrines, in festival songs, in family scrolls with names written in thinner ink. Where legend blazes brighter than proof, we say so. Tomoe's single combat lives in the poetry of Heika. Her battlefield stature is supported by the wider context. Hōjō Masako's rousing address is preserved in later accounts. Her political dominance is beyond dispute. Numbers for female martial burials vary regionally. The pattern recurs enough to matter. History rarely grants perfect certainty, but it offers enough threads to weave a fabric strong enough to wear and to honor. The eternal echo. They fought for their families, for their clans, for futures that would one day remember their names. History tried to silence them, but the sound of their swords still echoes through time. Because the soul of the samurai was never only male, it was human, it was eternal. It lives in every person who chooses courage over comfort, who stands for what is right when standing alone would be easier. Who knows true strength comes not from the sword in your hand, but the conviction in your heart. The onna-musha are gone, but their spirit endures. In every woman who refuses to be silenced, in every person who shoulders duty without applause, in every quiet act that keeps dignity unbroken. If you believe their stories deserve to be heard, share this video and subscribe to Japan Rewind, because some truths, like steel well-tempered, do not rust. They ring and ring and ring.